This talk explores visual salience, allocation in creativity, and psychosis proneness. Our study was conducted at the University of St Andrews and funded by the Carnegie Trust for the Universities of Scotland and Templeton Religion Trust. On the right, you see the famous mathematician John Nash, who also lived with schizophrenia. You may have seen the movie Beautiful Mind, which portrays his life story. The idea that mental illness and creativity are connected has emerged not only in popular culture, but also in philosophical and scientific thought over many years, with root in ancient Greek philosophy and Plato's concept of so-called divine madness. This connection is not only based on the fact that some highly creative individuals have experienced mental illness, such as John Nash or Van Gogh, but also on the observation that certain mechanisms of creative thinking resemble those in psychotic thinking. This raises a key question. Are these mechanisms the same? Is there a link between so-called madness and creativity? And in this study, we focus on one specific mechanism of abnormal thinking, aberrant salience. Aberrant salience refers to the tendency to assign importance to irrelevant or random information. That is, when people find meaning or significance in things that are random or irrelevant. Schizophrenia spectrum disorders in particular are often characterized by this trait, and some researchers believe it plays a central role in psychosis proneness and in development of delusions and hallucinations. Now, aberrant salience is typically measured using the aberrant salience inventory. It is a self-report measure. It includes items such as, do you sometimes feel like you're on the verge of something really big, but you're not sure what it is? Do you ever go through periods of heightened awareness? Do you sometimes feel like you're finding the missing piece to a puzzle? And so on. We also know that attending to relevant information and seeing connections between seemingly unrelated things is a feature of creative thinking. So we wanted to explore whether there are any similarities or differences in how people with aberrant salience and highly creative individuals allocate attention to irrelevant information. Now, what counts as irrelevant information? Semantic consistency plays an important role in determining that. We expect objects to appear in specific context based on their meanings. For example, we expect to see a giraffe in a zoo, but not on a city street. In this image, you see 4 types of objects differently related to a central target object, a chessboard. So a pawn is semantically related to the chessboard. A wooden abacus is visually similar to the chessboard. A tank is symbolically related, for instance, through the idea that war is a game. And a party hat, it is remotely related or completely unrelated to the chessboard. And we were interested not only in comparing related versus completely unrelated objects, but also in examining weak or remote associations, like symbolic relationships. We expected that these in particular might reveal differences between creativity and aberrant salience, because creative thinking often involves recognizing remote but meaningful associations, like those in metaphors. For example, war is a game. In contrast, we expected that aberrant salience would be linked to irrelevant or nonsensical associations, such as between a party hat and a chessboard. We wanted to understand how people allocate visual attention to these 4 types of objects, or 4 areas of interest, so we used eye tracking. We recruited 72 participants and presented 40 visual stimuli. Each stimulus consisted of 1 target object surrounded by 4 other objects. Participants were asked to select which of the 4 objects is meaningfully connected to the central target object. And while they were doing this, of course, we were recording their eye movements. After the task, we measured creativity using the abbreviated Torrance test and assessed aberrant salience with the aberrant salience inventory. Now, as expected, people focused mostly on visually similar and semantically related objects. They were next attracted to symbolically related objects, and finally to unrelated ones. So there is a party hat hidden there, the completely unrelated one. And we then compared these patterns between creative individuals and those with aberrant salience, paying particular attention to fixation biases. I mean differences in how long participants looked at visually and semantically related objects, closely related ones, versus remotely related, like symbolical, or completely unrelated ones. Now I want to focus on two main biases that relate to our key findings. First, we calculated the difference between total fixation time on semantically related objects versus on symbolically related objects. And we expected that this bias will be smaller in creative people because their attention should favor symbolically related objects. Second, we calculated the difference between total fixation time on visually similar objects versus on unrelated objects. We expected that this bias will be smaller among people with aberrant salience, since their attention tends to be drawn to completely unrelated objects. And we used mixed models. We entered creativity and aberrant salience as independent variables, fixation bias as the dependent variable, and image number and participant ID as random factors. Now, surprisingly, we found that the semantic versus symbolic bias was decreased among people with high aberrant salience, not creativity. Conversely, the bias between visually similar and unrelated objects was decreased among creative individuals. We expected to find differences in visual attention allocation between creativity and aberrant salience, and we discovered that aberrant salience is in fact linked to increased attention to symbolically related objects, those that are remotely but meaningfully connected. And these findings in fact support the so-called madness creativity link hypothesis and suggest that in a non-clinical population, aberrant salience may serve as an adaptive trait, reflecting increased sensitivity to remote yet meaningful associations. You can access our website for more information, including the paper draft, the data, and the stimuli we used. And I would like to thank my co-authors and our funders, without whom this study would not have been possible. Thank you very much.